What is going on, people? Today I want to go ahead and talk to you guys about familiars, specifically the wall or the stationed familiars, because I've been seeing a lot of people show me their setup, and I'm seeing a lot of like tier 1 and tier 2 familiars while they have maxed out familiars like T5, T4 and all of that. So I want to go ahead and go over this because there seems to be this notion that the higher tier familiars, like the 600% ones and these are all bad, and that's not really the case. I think that the game has changed enough to where we have to kind of revisit this and think about what we really want to do with our familiars. Now, here's the number one thing, right? If you're free to play and you can't get most of these familiars, then the usual familiars that most people are running, the Drown Out. Let me show you. Drown Out, that's still really good. The ones that give you the buff per troop type. Hardy Feast, these are also really good options. Not only because they're cheap, they start right at the beginning of the battle, but they're just in general pretty good. So if this is what you're going with when you're free to play account, then that's still really good. It still holds up today, just because you probably are not going to be able to get the higher tier ones. Now, if you are not in that category, this is mainly going to be for you. These T5, I call it T5. I wonder if they're actually considered T5. Like, well, technically, yeah, rarity 5. So yeah, well, we'll just call it T5. These T5 familiars, they're actually very good. Now, a lot of people are like, well, you have to lose 4% of your troops before they do anything. Well, listen, the way that the game is set up now, you're more than likely going to lose 4% of your troops each rally, unless you like really hard counter them and the rally lead is very weak. And in that case, you probably don't need familiars anyway, right? But these familiars here, I think, are a must-have on your wall. Let me say that again. They are a must-have on your wall, especially if you have them all three. Now, don't believe me? Don't worry. I have a clip to show you that shows these three familiars going off and what they do to a rally. Roll it. Now, as you can see there, those familiars essentially completely ended the rally once they procced, okay? Now, 4% of your troops, obviously, if you have like 100 million troops, 4% of your troops, that's a lot of troops. That's 4 million troops. But even if you have half of that, let's say you have 50 million, 2 million troops is nothing crazy to think about that you're going to lose in a rally, especially like, for instance, if you're countered, right? Because familiars and the rally by themselves are probably going to do 2 million. And if you're countered, probably more. So the way that I set up my wall is that if I get countered, what's the best way to mitigate as much damage as possible? And with these three familiars, once I lose 4% of my troops, their rally is going to be absolutely destroyed, or at least demolish most of their power once they go off. Now, the next two, because remember, these three, I feel like they are absolute must-have. If you have them, you must. The other three T5 familiars, they are not as good because they require twice as much of your troops to be lost, so 8% instead of 4%. And their main drawback also is that their damage is going to be over time, meaning that every 4 seconds they're going to be proccing and doing damage. But remember, by the time you lose 8% of your troops, the battle is pretty much going to be over for the most part. So you're not going to be using maybe half of this procs, if not even less. So that's why these, the Brutal Bunny, Stinging Swarm, and Killing Frost, they're very bad for the most part. Because you're just not going to see most of this damage unless you just don't have many troops. But the same can be said with just troops in general. The more troops you have, the less effective most of these familiars are going to be. So keep that in mind. And then we get to the next two spots here, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because for now, I'm either gonna be using Gilded Guard, that's gonna protect 7% of my infantry troops from a killing blow when 12% of your infantry troops have fallen, or Snow Shield, which does the same except it swaps over to range. Now, I know what most of you are thinking. Whoa, 12%, that's a lot. Is it though? Is it? It says 12% of your infantry troops, not 12% of your troops. 12% of your infantry troops, meaning your front line, or at least hopefully if you're gonna be set up this way, I would hope that this would be what you have as your front line. Now, let me actually go ahead and do the math for you, right? So this is not going to go off until 12% of my infantry troops have fallen. So let's see how many infantry troops I actually have right now, right? So let's see, I have, well, let's just start here. 15, let's say 17 and a half. We'll go with 19 million. 19 million infantry troops, right? So let me whip out my calculator here real quick and do the math. Minus 12% of my troops. So that'll give me 2.2 million troops before that procs. Now, think about it, okay? Think about why I'm doing this. So if my familiars are set up to stop any sort of like big counters, then let's say I'm taking this in an infantry wedge and I get hit with a cavalry rally, I'm going to lose 2.2 million troops. Like, for the most part, unless the rally lead that's attacking you is just super weak, doesn't have the familiars, etc. But for the most part, like, most rally leads are at least somewhat competent. You're going to be losing 2.2 million troops. That would be the equivalent of seeing like 4.4 troops killed in the Gazette. So yeah, you're probably going to be losing that either way. So what this is designed for is that if it comes to a counter, not only are these three familiars going to go off and absolutely destroy their rally once they get to 4%, that 4% probably goes right around the time that this is also going to be proccing at 12%. Because think about it, 4% of your troops, one troop type, 12%, that's about right. So they're all going to be going off about the same time, and that's when you lose about 2 million troops, give or take. And they're there to mitigate the damage. Now, the last thing is this one, Last Dance. And it keeps on with the same theme. Increases infantry max HP by 80% for 10 seconds when 10% of your infantry troops have fallen. Now, again, this is specifically on your infantry troops. So by the time all of these familiars are going to be proccing is by the time you've lost about 2 million troops. Now, if you don't ever get to that point where you've lost 2 million troops, probably means that you've countered them. And if you counter somebody in this game, you don't really need the familiars. Like, the counter itself is going to do the work. So that's the way that I am setting up my familiars, is to set up just in case I do get countered to mitigate as much damage as I possibly can. Because if I do counter them, I don't nearly need as much help from my familiars that I would if I do get countered myself. Now, you can go ahead and do it completely different. Let's say you don't want to go this route, and you want to go with Hearty Feast and Drown Out, and this is the ones that give you HP and also takes away from the army HP. That way you're basically covered from any standpoint. You get your 4% if you lose 4% of your troops, but you'll also get the boost right away no matter what happens, no matter if you get countered or you don't get countered. I guess in this case it would be more of a preference thing. But for me, depending on if I'm going to be taking it in infantry wedge or range wedge, I definitely prefer to go with something like this, because all I'm worried about is the counter. At least for me specifically. All I'm worried about is if I get countered, how can I use my familiars to lower that damage as much as I can? And right now, this is the best way that I can go about it. There is another thing that I wanted to touch on, and this is going like, let's say I go range wedge and I go snow shield, and I go, what's the other one? Strange sorcery, I believe, right? So let's say I switch it over to range, right? And I'm gonna be taking it in range wedge. So in this case, the same thing applies, right? Most of these familiars are probably going to go off around the same time. 4% of your troops, 12% of your range, or 10% of your range. That all should be happening roughly about the same time, unless your troop composition is just way off. So all of these familiars should be going off at the same time, but there is one exception, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So remember, this goes off when 12% of your range troops are falling, and this one goes off when 10% of your range troops are fallen, and I'm sitting in a range wedge. The thing about that is that the way that I have my army set up currently, that would actually be much harder to do to trigger those two familiars, because my infantry is actually my highest troop type over ranged. So even if I'm sitting at a range wedge, their familiars are not going to be hitting my range. Their familiars are actually going to be hitting my infantry. So it's actually going to take their rally alone without familiars to actually take down my range. So even if it's an infantry rally, since their familiars are going to be hitting my gladiators, because that's my highest squads, my range is not going to go down as fast as I would like it. So in this case, like this is what I like to call the two front line setup. And if you don't know exactly what I mean by that, I'll touch on it real quick. The two front line setup, for instance, right, is if I'm sitting in a range formation right here, right, I'm going to be using my range front to take the actual rally. But remember that the familiars, the T5 familiars and all of that, they target the highest amount of troops that you have per squad. And in this case, since I have more infantry than all of the other troops, their familiars are going to hit my infantry and their rally is going to hit my range. So their actual damage is not going to be all on my front line. It's going to be spread out. So because I have a range formation and I have the range familiars that only proc when 12% and 10% of my range troops go down, then it becomes way harder for this to proc. In this case, you would need to actually have the rally itself do 2 million plus the familiar damage, which is usually somewhere around 700-800k. So it's not really the best. So I'm not really set up the best to take it in range wedge. But remember, at the end of the day, the setup is, at least my setup, is to mitigate as much damage as I can from a counter to my front line. So if an infantry rally hits me and I'm sitting in range wedge, and if it's a decent lead, it should probably take out 2 million anyways. So I think it'll still proc, just not as soon as you would want it. So that's also something to keep in mind. If you just want to have just something that will work in general, then this is where you will keep the 3 familiars, the T5 familiars, and then this is where you would play a little bit safer and go with these 2 familiars, because this will help you no matter what troops are going down. So something to keep in mind. For now, the best way that I'm set up is for infantry wedge. But I'm not a big fan of taking, like for instance, rally parties in infantry wedge, because cavalry usually gets designated to the big boys, and it means that you're going to be losing 5 to 7 million infantry in one rally, most likely. So not the greatest. I myself prefer range wedge just in general. It's definitely, I think range wedge is the best defensive formation in the whole game. Obviously, it depends, right? But like just in general, if there's a rally party coming at you, I still feel like range wedge is the favorite in general to take rallies in. I think it's the hardest one to crack. But yeah, I'm just been seeing a lot of people, instead of having their T5 familiars, which they do have, etc., they'll have like all of these. They'll have the ones that give you 15% attack, and then they'll have a bunch of like tier 1 and tier 2 familiars, which is great because you get the boost every time. But if you get countered, they're not going to be nearly as helpful actually mitigating that damage. So I definitely do think that these familiars right here are a must. If you have them, add them to your wall. Add them to your wall. Matter of fact, I'm going to add the clip again. That way you know exactly what I'm talking about. Roll it again. If that doesn't convince you, I don't know what will. And then from there, if you have these three, from there, I guess you can make the call depending on your troop composition, how it would actually go for you. If you want to go infantry like this, or you want to go ranged. I probably put the two wrong ones, but you get the point. If you want to go with a setup like this, or if you want to go with a setup like this, or you want to play it a little bit safer and go with something like this, where it will help you in all the rallies, no matter what you lose, etc., etc. But yeah, if you have the T5 familiars, I know that most people say that T5 familiars are bad, and that's true. These are bad, but these are absolutely a must-have on your wall. You must have these on your wall. Please put them on your wall. Either way, if you have any other tips that you want to provide for familiars, leave it in the comment section. Let's share some information. That way people are not putting some just terrible familiar. Well, I shouldn't say terrible. They all are pretty decent. Except, what's his name? Let me see. Except Pyrus. Pyrus is pretty terrible. Yeah. If you're using Pyrus, just know that Pyrus is absolutely one of the worst familiars you can use. It procs right away, and it lasts for the first 10 seconds, but the fight doesn't start until it's got like 4 seconds left on the down boost. And yeah, the heroes probably won't even use their tactics skills more than once. It's not very good. Don't use Pyrus. But like I said, appreciate you guys for coming by. If you have any other information to share regarding familiars, leave it down in the comment section. If you disagree, for sure leave it down in the comment section. That's a conversation to be had. There's definitely not one way to do it because there's so many different factors in this game. What you're trying to accomplish versus somebody else. Your troop composition, what's best for your troop composition, your gear. The kingdom that you're in can dictate a lot of that too. So, again, not everything is 100% solid. You must do this. Except these familiars. I do feel like these familiars are, like, you gotta have them. I digress. Appreciate you guys for coming through. And until later.